I just want to stress this is something that's deeply important to taxpayers, and I think it's something that I and I expect a lot of my colleagues, hopefully on both sides of the aisle, will be strictly holding this administration to account on. You, in the IRA, got an additional $80 billion, 6 times the annual budget of the IRS, through the, I should say, not directly Treasury, but the IRS, and 87,000 new employees. Now, the request in this year's budget, because that's what we're talking about here today, is for an additional 15% increase, somewhere on the order of 29 or $30 billion in additional. We still don't have the plan for the $80 billion in IRS funding, and there was supposed to be a plan made public several weeks ago. So could you speak to when we might see a plan, since there's a request now for additional funding above and beyond what was a massive, historic amount of funding in the IRA?
So the plan is almost complete, and you should have it in the near future.
And what does that mean, near future?
In a matter of weeks.
Okay. All right. I hope that you can follow through on that. And let me just ask, with respect to the use of that $80 billion, some of it I know was supposed to be funded toward taxpayer services, which I hope is the case, because the IRS has had a deplorable record on getting back to taxpayers, 13% phone call return rate. How much of that $80 billion is going to be directed to enforcement, and does the Treasury expect that any of that revenue is going to come from increased audits of middle-class taxpayers?
The President and I have committed that there will be no increase in audit rates on individuals or small businesses under $400,000, and I stand by that pledge, and I've issued a directive to IRS to that effect. And most of the hiring, the large numbers that are seen, are replacement of people who are retiring, but there will be additional hiring, both of customer service representatives. 5,000 more were hired this season, and the response rate has gone from the 13% you mentioned to around 85% this tax season, and we want to keep it at that level and add other things that will make filing and interacting with the IRS more convenient for both individuals and for businesses. But an important goal is greater enforcement, hiring of skilled tax lawyers and auditors and accountants to deal with high income and high net worth individuals, complex partnerships, and corporations where we think most of the tax gap is centered. And so, although $80 billion over 10 years, it sounds like a huge investment. It's one with an enormous payoff, that it substantially lowers the budget deficit because we have a huge tax gap that needs to be addressed.
The time, my friends, expired. We're going to push very hard to get every finance member a chance to ask their questions before we go. Next will be Senator Lankford, Senator Cortez Masto. We've got the Secretary till 1. Senator Lankford.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, thanks for being here. There's a lot of things that I wanted to be able to talk about on this. We've got some tax proposals on the table. I have a bipartisan charitable act dealing with tax policy that we're not going to have time to be able to talk through. I'd like to be able to talk about full expensing. Senator Toomey used to be able to champion this, but it's a big issue for our manufacturers in my state and all around the country. Love to get a chance to talk about that. I'd love to talk about marriage penalties in the tax code because, quite frankly, they're still there. It's one of the things we've got to be able to work on, energy independence. I did notice a whole new set of new taxes on energy companies in the United States that I think would hurt our energy independence. And there's still no definition for the $600 if you do Venmo payments to somebody up to $600. Now the IRS is going to track you. I've noticed that you've delayed that, and the IRS has delayed that. But there's a lot of questions with that, and new creative definitions of what it means to be made in America. We now have new treaties that are popping up that are not really treaties, not really free trade agreements, but are being declared free trade agreements to allow from the Inflation Reduction Act actions from Japan and Germany to now be defined as made in America. I find that very creative. Love to talk about all that. Don't have time. I'd need to be able to drill in on a couple of things. Let me start with some of the banking issues we're dealing with on it. Will the deposits in every community bank in Oklahoma, regardless of their size, be fully insured now? Are they fully recovered? Every bank, every community bank in Oklahoma, regardless of the size of the deposit, will they get the same treatment that SVBP just got or Signature Bank just got?
A bank only gets that treatment if a majority of the FDIC board, a supermajority of the Fed board, and I, in consultation with the president, determine that the failure to protect uninsured depositors would create systemic risk and significant economic and financial consequences.
So what is your plan?
And we made that determination.
Right. So what is your plan to keep large depositors from moving their funds out of community banks into the big banks? We have seen the mergers of banks over the past decade. I'm concerned you're about to accelerate that by encouraging anyone who has a large deposit in a community bank to say, we're not going to make you whole, but if you go to one of our preferred banks, we will make you whole at that point.
Look, I mean, that's certainly not something that we're encouraging.
That is happening right now.
That is happening because depositors are concerned about the bank failures that have happened and whether or not other banks could also
No, it's happening
And
because you're fully insured no matter what the amount is if you're in a big bank. You're not fully insured if you're in a community bank.
Well, you're not fully insured. And
you were at Signature, and it just barely met that threshold. You were at Signature.
Well, we felt that there was a serious risk of contagion that could have brought down and triggered runs on many banks, and that's something, given that our judgment is that the banking system overall is safe and sound, depositors should have confidence in the system, and we took these actions.
So there's a special assessment that's been done on community banks in my state and all banks across the country. Was there any discussion that that special assessment would only apply to the larger banks, or was it always assumed the special assessment would cover every bank, including rural banks in my state?
I think I'm not certain what the rules are around that. That's for the FDIC to determine.
It has been reported publicly that SVB had a large number of Chinese investors that are there, including some that were companies directly connected to the Chinese Communist Party. Will those individuals, companies, entities, and investors that are Chinese investors be made whole based on assessments in my banks in Oklahoma? So what I'm asking is, will my banks in Oklahoma pay a special assessment to be able to make Chinese investors whole from Silicon Valley Bank?
Uninsured investors will be made whole in that bank, and I suppose that could include foreign depositors, but I don't believe there's any legal basis to discriminate among uninsured.
I get it.